All right, let's jump right in with a question that honestly gets right to the heart of what we think of as fair. Can you be held accountable for breaking a rule you didn't even know existed?
I mean, really? Is "I didn't know" a good enough excuse? Can you just plead ignorance and that's it? You're off the hook? To really dig into this, we're going to explore how the Bible tackles this very problem.
So, let's start at the beginning, way back in the Old Testament, and you might be surprised to find out it had a specific requirement for sins you didn't even realize you'd done.
And the answer, right out of the gate, is pretty strict. The law of Moses is super clear. Ignorance was not an excuse, period. Even if you broke a rule by accident, it was still considered a violation. And this wasn't some minor rule either. It applied to everyone. We're talking priests, leaders, regular folks. You couldn't just say, oops, and move on. According to Leviticus, an unintentional sin still needed to be dealt with. It required a specific sacrifice to make things right. What really mattered was the act itself, not whether you meant to do it.
Okay, but that's not the whole story. As we shift into the New Testament, you can see the thinking on this starts to change. There's this new emphasis on mercy and a different way of looking at accountability.
The focus really does a 180. It becomes less about what you did and much more about why you did it. What was your intent? What did you know at the time?
And there's this great parable that makes it crystal clear, the parable of the servant. Jesus tells the story where a servant who knows what his master wants but ignores it gets a severe beating. But here's the interesting part. The servant who didn't know and messed up, well, he still faces consequences, but it's a light beating. So you see, accountability is on a sliding scale. Being ignorant doesn't get you off scot-free, but it definitely reduces the severity.
And this idea is summed up in that super famous line, "Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required." And hey, that's not just about money or stuff. It's about knowledge. It's about responsibility. The more you understand, the higher the bar is set for you.
So this isn't just some hypothetical story. We actually see a real-life, powerful example of this with one of the biggest names in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul.
See, before he was Paul, he was Saul, and he was hunting down members of the early church, and he thought he was doing God's work. Later, when he writes about it, he says he was shown mercy because he acted in ignorance and unbelief. He genuinely didn't know better. It's like a perfect case study of this principle in action.
Okay, so we've established that ignorance can lead to mercy. But you know what's coming next, right? There have to be limits. At what point does "I didn't know" stop working as an excuse?
I mean, can you just stick your head in the sand? Can you purposely avoid learning the rules just so you can claim ignorance later? Is that a valid loophole?
Well, the Bible draws a really important line in the sand. It makes a huge distinction between what you could call honest ignorance, like you genuinely had no way of knowing, and willful sin. That second one is when you know something is wrong and do it anyway, or even when you actively refuse to see the truth that's right there. And yeah, those two things are not treated the same.
And that distinction is key, because the argument is that some basic fundamental truths, they aren't secrets. You don't need a special book to know them. They are available to absolutely everyone, no matter where you are.
And the language here is incredibly blunt. The book of Romans says the truth about God is plain to see, which leads to the knockout punch, so that people are without excuse. Whoa! So for these core fundamental things, you can't play the ignorance card.
So how is everyone supposed to know this stuff? Well, the text gives two big reasons. First, just by looking at the world around you, creation itself. And second, through your own conscience. That little voice inside, that law on the heart that gives you a basic gut feeling about right and wrong.
All right, so let's pull all these threads together. We've got the strict Old Testament view, the more merciful New Testament approach, and then this idea that some things you just can't claim ignorance about. So, what's the bottom line? And as you've probably figured out by now, the answer to our big question isn't a simple yes or no. It's way more of a yes, but kind of situation. Let's break it down into 3 key points. 1, God shows mercy. If you're honestly ignorant, there's compassion and forgiveness. 2, guilt isn't totally wiped away. There might still be consequences, even if they're not as severe. And 3, some truth is universal. If you deliberately ignore what's obvious from creation and your own conscience, well, that's on you.
So at the end of the day, what this all seems to point to is that it's less about a perfect checklist of do's and don'ts, and more about something deeper. It's about the state of your heart. Are you sincerely trying to do the right thing with the information you have?
And that leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. This whole idea that your level of knowledge and intent matters. It's an ancient concept. So how do you see this principle playing out today? In our laws, in our ideas of justice, and how we think about what it means to be truly responsible?